right, starting recording. There we go. All right, welcome everybody to the virtual brown bag. This is something that we do every week. I'll go through a quick introduction. I'm Claudio La Sala, and just quickly go through this introduction, give folks some time to join in. Also, having this recorded, which is like the main point that comes up here, right? So we record all these meetings so that people later can catch up with the stuff that we've discussed here, or even for those who were able to attend, you know, maybe you want to come back later and review some of the things that we've shared. So please make sure if you are going to be sharing something, you know, do not share anything that can cause you any trouble with your employers, with your clients. Keep that in mind. Other than that, you know, just please go ahead and share things as we go. So what is this virtual brown bag thing? Is essentially a place where we can get together, share tips and tricks. We can share experiences we've had, the things that we've learned the hard way. You know, maybe we can make it, you know, easier for somebody else who may be going or may, may be experiencing the same challenges that you are. Frustrations or difficulties. Maybe you have an issue that, you know, you've been fighting over and you have no idea how to address it, or maybe you've found a way around it, but you feel like, you know, that is not really the best way to go about it. Well, share that with us. Maybe somebody else has been through the same issues and, you know, can help you out. It's definitely not supposed to be a one-way conversation. It's not supposed to be, you know, your typical like webinar or presentation where there's one person talking through a well-structured presentation. The idea here is really to replicate that experience that you have when you are just walking down the hallway and you say, hey, dude, check this out. This one thing that I've learned here. Or, man, I'm having this thing kicking my butt here. Do you know anything about it? That's the kind of conversation to have in here. So definitely, you know, don't be shy sharing things. Logistics, we do this every Thursday, 12 to 1 Central Time. Except if we have some sort of scheduling issues and we have to move it, we let you know, beforehand. But for the most part, this should be the time. We are going to be doing it on Skype, at least for now. We are trying this free offering from Skype to run these meetings. And, you know, for whoever wants to, you know, share or learn or doing both here, that's who these meetings are for. Some things that we've shared before, this is not a full list, but you can see that we've been all over the map, from C# to JavaScript to whatever language of choice people are using or experimenting with, different applications that people use, software, processes. It doesn't matter, you know, just bring it up. We've been, again, all over the map. There is a website, virtualbrownbag.com, where you can always find a link to the meeting. You can find links to the videos from the previous meetings and link to Twitter, a Slack channel that we have to discuss things, you know, maybe extending the conversation afterwards. So make sure to check it out. And without further ado, well, let's keep on rolling. We always have, or normally we're going to have my good friend George here. What have you been up to, George?
Oh my God. Let's see. Not that much. I did decide to like try to get a little better with Advanced TypeScript, which I can talk about a little bit. Here's
very
the
cool.
thing. I'll actually note this because so I was on a call with a potential client and our CEO, and this was like so in my job, I'm CTO. Obviously, part of it is coming up with proposals and you know, some sales engineering, I guess.
Right.
So this is a client we had engaged in for a while. They wanted to work with us, but because we're a nonprofit, you know, working with us, it gives people, trains people up, gets more people in the industry. But they were trying to find the right project for us, so we had already kind of gone back and forth and get with like a proposal, and they kind of came back. But they were this was to build like an application for them, and they weren't sure about it. This is like a mobile app, and so we kind of went through this round. Now they're not sure about the money, and it goes all the way to their main a guy who holds the purse strings for the project. And he asked for the call, one of those, hey, I have a couple of technical issues I want to talk through, where realistically it's like, okay, I want to kind of get a feel for these people who I'd be giving this large chunk of money for, and kind of what they're doing, what they're capable of. And this meeting goes okay, but obviously, like, after those meetings, it can go either way. And then my CEO does this interesting thing, which I don't think he did it on purpose, but it was such a baller move how it worked out. He basically starts and this is kind of toward the end of the meeting, he starts questioning the entire business model of the project to begin with, which is kind of pushing back against the idea of having the project. It's like, doing this as an app, I don't know if anybody would buy this from the App Store. I wouldn't buy it from the App Store. And yeah, I know, it's crazy. Like, oh no, what are you doing?
Wow.
But then what happens, it causes the main stakeholder to go into sales mode and start justifying the project to him, and basically go through his own sales pitch out loud, reselling himself on the idea of the project. And and it's just like, holy cow, that's a high stakes move. But like, that really can work out for you. Like, that's a really interesting sales tactic to have in your back pocket. Because, like, yeah, if you get the person to then say all their justifications for why out loud for why they do believe there's a market, and really push back on you for it, then it's the person who's like making the decisions. I mean, all things being equal, they're way more likely to approve you then. So I was just like, I've never heard of anyone doing that, but that is kind of a cool move.
Interesting. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. That's definitely food for thought.
Yeah, I really enjoyed like thinking about that today. Yeah, so that's one of the things that's been up with that, and beyond that,
okay.
I mean, I've got some crazy TypeScript stuff that I could share.
I'd love to see that.
Yeah, what have you been up to?
Well, so yeah, it's very timely that you have some TypeScript to share, because I just started messing with TypeScript 3 weeks ago, I'd say. I had not had a reason, before that to actually work with it. But then started looking into, just catching up with where Angular is, because I had previous Angular JS experience, and then the last 2 years I've worked with React, and now I have an option to, go whichever route. I'm actually doing some like researching, where's Angular today, where's React, where is Vue, whatever else, so that before, deciding on a stack for the next project, I want to make sure that, I have all the information that I need to make a well-informed decision. So, started messing with the TypeScript, of course, coming from so many years of C# development, I really learned to love my strong typing languages, or strongly typed languages. So far I'm enjoying TypeScript. It gives me the kind of stuff that I always miss when I'm in JavaScript land. So yeah, anything that you can share along those lines, I'm going to be taking notes here as I'm in sponge mode. And so yeah, by all means, share what you have there, and then later I can jump in, and there's a couple more things I can share as well.
I'll talk to it. So yeah, let's talk TypeScript. So I've at this point done one project, I think. Oh yeah, like let's say one project with TypeScript. And I need to just start screen sharing. I've at this point done like one project with TypeScript, and kind of I've been following it for a long time, playing around with it for a long time. It's interesting. I don't really have anything against it. I do think it's overused. I personally don't feel a lot of need for strong types for a lot of type stuff. And actually, I found I do not buy the selling point of, or the main selling point of it that people use, which is like, oh, it's so much easier for beginners to get started, because
Okay.
I've worked with it with beginners on my project, and what I've seen them now. Granted, they were people that were trained in JavaScript, but nowadays almost every beginner is largely trained in JavaScript, or Ruby,
Right.
like that.
Sure.
And what I found was so many of they were spending so much time dealing with trying to figure out type theory and how the types fit together
Okay.
that when they had the basic idea already, they just couldn't get the compiler to work. Um, and especially because like if you're going to do TypeScript correctly, you need to do generics, and generics come from is like a whole other thing. Um,
Yeah.
And like the specific thing I'll point out, like there was a situation where I had two junior developers trying to figure out, how to do this thing with a grid, and um, it turned out the API on the grid, like that they wanted to use, that did exactly what they needed, was already available. They had found documentation about this API, and it said it was available. The TypeScript like definition file that was being used for the API hadn't gotten updated to include that method. So
Man.
they spent a ton of time trying. They tried to use it. The compiler said no, you can't use this, and spent a ton of time, like a day and a half, trying to come up with other ways to do it. When really the right move was like, the definition file is out of date. Go update the definition file. Um, and that was like a very frustrating situation, which is like the type that I've seen happen a couple times,
Okay.
where it's just like that's like the prime example of when it's just harder for juniors than it needs to be. Like they had it, they had it, and they just couldn't get it working because they were dealing with the compiler not working. Um,
Interesting.
yeah, yeah. Um,
Okay.
so so that's part of my issue with it.
That's
That's
okay.
so the reason I got interested in it is a long time ago. I showed my GymGen library, um, for that I created. Um, Actually, let me pull that up. I did a presentation recently on it last week, um, for the Woman Who Code group. So
Right. How did that go?
the presentation went well. There's if you go to my blog, there's now a link to the video and everything.
Oh,
Um,
nice.
yeah,
Check it
but like
out.
so basically, this library, it's. I mean, I'll be the first to admit it's this really crazy library, but it's been around for long enough now, even though no one's used it, that I felt finally confident enough to publish it to NPM.
Okay.
It allows you to do crazy like flow control stuff that I haven't seen anywhere else, like where you're using do loops and while trues and stuff like that.
Hmm.
And I can go into this later, but I want to talk about TypeScript. And so basically, as part of publishing, I was like, all right, I don't feel the need for it, but I do understand how a library, which is all these like weird concepts, would be easier for a lot of people if it did have the types associated with it. So I've been
Right.
going through and trying to add types, and this is still in a branch right now. It's not published. I do find it makes it so much more verbose, and there are all sorts of this thing gets pretty complex, and there's a lot of stuff which I'm not sure TypeScript can handle in what I do. So
Okay.
an example would be an example would be that I have like a lot of places where I might invoke a function. So to create a factory equals some something, and I pass in like a prototype object of what I want. Yeah, food, and then I'll do something like no. Let me think about it. What would I do? Yeah,
Okay.
do something like So kind of an almost React-like pattern.
Right.
And then it might do something like state plus param1 plus param2, something like that. And then so I get it back a factory function, and then I would expect to call that factory function, and then pass in some other things, and then I would expect obj.foo to exist, and I could invoke it like that, and basically these parameters would be spread into here, but then this would come from the library itself, and and maybe even I can pass in some other ones, 7, right, and maybe it's inner param 1 inner param, like all sorts of stuff where it gets kind of really dynamic like that, and you can kind of do that with TypeScript. But the thing that gets really difficult is because these things have to have types as well, and those things, and I have to have some way of saying that the type here has to match whatever type you actually invoke it with, and like these things don't have to be the same type. Like one can be one type, one can be the other. And so I'm trying to reason through ways to do that, where you have variadic generic type parameters. Like you have a generic type parameters, but it could be any number of generics. So like I'm just not sure that I could do it. So one of the things I decided to do was to jump to just trying to do the most advanced TypeScript tutorial that I could. And a friend of me directed me to this article right here. Oh, there we go. Nope, this is not it. Where are you? There we go. This person is basically making FizzBuzz using only TypeScript types. So apparently the TypeScript type system is Turing complete. The TypeScript type system itself is Turing complete, and you can write it using TypeScript type in such a way that it would generate FizzBuzz without actually, you don't have to run the code, just a compiler will generate those types for you. So, and kind of my way of going through this is like, all right, I'm like reading just enough of this to get a hint as to what the next step would be, and then trying to like code it.
Okay.
And yeah, you know me, I'm all about org mode. I think it's the best. So, I'm doing this in org mode, so it kind of executes directly in there. So I'll take you through this. What just happened? Okay, I'll take you through what's going on here. This, by the way, is an org mode extension I found called org roam, which is pretty neat. It's like for note taking, and the basic idea is that you bend up over time, building up this big network of your notes. Like it's all about linking from one note to the other, and then each note can show you all the backlinks to it. And I'm trying to build it up as much as possible and kind of get this big database of things that I think about and how they can. Yeah. So basically, I'm going to follow along with this article, and I'm just going to try to figure it out myself, just using it for hints. So basically, you're trying to create FizzBuzz. Let's get the outlines of how it would work, how it would be worked together. One of the things you need is a library. So one of the first things you might want is like an assertion system to know whether you did the right thing or not. So with TypeScript, you could create a type that looks like this: type EQ A, B extends A, and that's gonna and anything that is that type is going to be this constant token equals. It's a string, but it's not really like a string because it's in the type system itself. So think of it as a symbol or a token, right?
Right.
You can't like mutate a string in that case, or add to it or do anything dynamic with it.
Right.
So basically, when I create this type, this generic type, if the thing that's passed into A and the thing that's passed into B are the same, it should compile. If they're different, then the type system will not match and the compilation would fail. So I don't, my indentation, it's screwed up indentation here. So here's an example, right? So I'm pulling in that right there, and I have this, and I'm doing EQ, and then the token hello and hello, or the token hello and the type hello, which is defined to be the token hello, or the other way around. And when I run it, I mean, I get no results because there's no results to give, but that just means compilation succeeded, right?
Okay.
Right, and that kind of makes sense. Okay, and what if we do something that would cause an error here? I'm going to make this larger, by the way. Okay, we get an error right here, right? Type goodbye does not satisfy constraint hello. Okay, you can kind of see the outline of how that's of what that's doing, right? It's not too too crazy. All right. So here we start building on that. This is what I was doing until like midnight last night. All right, so we can make some numbers. That's easy. Now, because we're talking about FizzBuzz, we don't care about negative numbers. So if it's not I'm just going to create one type for everything that's not a whole number. Again, the value of it doesn't matter. It just has to be something that's unique relative to everything else.
Mm-hmm.
And then for the numbers itself, the only thing you really need is the concept of it's the next one from the previous one. And any way of expressing that in a type system works. So one of the ways of doing that would be with arrays. So tuples, really. So a 0 is just going to be defined as a number 0. And then a 1 is going to be defined the type 0 that's in an array with the second value being +1. It doesn't matter what that second value is. It just has to be something, right? And then a 2 is defined as the first type that's in this array with another +1. So basically, this is going to be right. It's basically 0, comma +1, comma +1, like that, right? That's what the type is actually equal to.
Okay.
Yeah. So this type will be matched when this is the thing, right? A 2 is like that. Okay. So again, it doesn't matter what the second part of the tuple is. It just has to be something. Once we have that, we can actually do incrementing. So I'm going to define incrementing as taking a generic argument and returning an array with that generic argument and a +1. So a 4 is defined as an increment with the generic closed on 3. 5 is defined as increment with the generic closed on 4. 6 is defined as increment with generic closed on 5. Okay. So if I'm going to go ahead and test this right here, I'm going to run the so is incrementing 4 the same as _4? Is incrementing 2 is the same as incrementing from 0 to 3 times? I'm going to run that. I get no errors. Again, I come down here. Is incrementing 3 the same as 3? Or is incrementing not a whole number the same as, well, anything? Right? It's just a generic parameter.
Oh.
So I run that. There you go. And yeah, I get this right here. So each one of those gives me a compilation error.
Okay.
right? It's weird. It comes together. Okay. Next part gets even weirder. All right. Decrementing something. So you need to unwrap the generic. Right? The increment was, pull this up. We don't need that. But incrementing is wrapping it in an array. decrementing needs to unwrap it. And this is where we get into territory where I definitely had to look it up, and this is nothing that even close to exists in C#.
Okay.
You can do crazy things with an array. So basically, there's a conditional on the type parameter itself. So what this is saying is the type decrement of t, if the generic parameter t is of type increment of u, then decrement of t becomes u. Otherwise, it's not a whole number. So basically, if our thing that we're passing in there matches this, that it was created with increment, or matches one of the increment types, then it's going to infer the generic argument that was into there, which is going to be the one less, and return that. Otherwise, we're saying, well, this was probably like 0 or something like that, or some crazy type. Then it's not a whole number, and that's all we need to know. And again, we can test. We can start typing. So again, I run this, no errors. I run this, and it gives me a compilation error down here. It's crazy. Like I love that this person figured it out. I mean, it's getting like really computer sciencey with like, oh, how do you build a whole like computation engine from just the ability to assert some states?
Okay.
Yeah. Like this is wild. All right, let's keep going. All right, so now we go to subtract. So subtract, this is the first time we're going to get into recursive type declarations, right? So subtract is going to take n and an amount, and if the amount extends 0, so we're subtracting 0, then just return n. Otherwise, decrement n, decrement amount, and subtract those two. Okay. That doesn't work. That should work. It doesn't work because TypeScript has a bug, or perhaps the bug is the fact that you can get it working via a hack. Basically, it doesn't want you to do recursive type declarations. But you can do it with the hack. And the hack looks like this. So basically, you create an object which has properties for n or this, and then which property you reference is immediately resolved by that conditional type. So it's the same thing as up here. Like this is this more straightforward thing to read, but like because TypeScript has this limitation, you can get around it with this really weird hack of creating an object and resolving which property of the object you care about via the type conditional. Okay, right. To do that, we can use types to subtract stuff. So again, if you've ever like messed with Prolog, like this really feels a lot like that, where it's like, oh, I can just make programs and the whole program is either true or false for some reason, but like it doesn't do anything, right? So I do this, subtract 6 and 4, these types that I created, it's going to give me the type 2. If you create a generic subtract 2 from 3 type, that's going to give you not a whole number. It just ends up working. If you try to do something like this, okay, you have your thing wrong, you get compilation errors. We'll keep going.
Okay. Yeah.
Talked about that. Talked about decrement. All right. Is divisible by? You kind of do a similar thing, right? So basically, if you have n, the numerator that's divisible by d. So if the divisor is 0 or negative, then you're going to say, no, nothing's divisible by 0 or a negative number. If n is 0, then 0 is divisible by everything true. If n is negative, you'll see why we do that, it's false. And the reason why is because how we implement the recursive part is basically we're saying otherwise subtract the denominator from the numerator. and then see if that result is implemented. So we're just subtracting down all the way. You do 255, see if it's divisible by 5. You just keep subtracting 5 from it until it gets to 0. You do 7, you just keep subtracting 7 from it until it gets to negatives, and it returns false. So that like what the compiler itself does. So again, you run this, and that part passes. So now we can say we can make assertions on whether stuff is divisible in the type system itself. All right.
Okay.
So now implementing FizzBuzz itself basically becomes this right here. So we're going to create an isDivisibleBy3 function by just solidifying that. By the way, if you screw that up and you do a 3 in there instead of the token you created, it gives you a really weird error that references a completely other part of the code that has nothing to do with this. You can create an AND function, an AND type, which is basically if this one is false, then it's going to be false. If this one is true, then it's false, then false. Otherwise, true. So basically, if both of these types are something that basically it can only be the value true, then you're going to return true.
Okay.
And then FizzBuzz becomes, well, a big conditional type that if it is divisible by 3 and is divisible by 5, then if that whole thing is true, then FizzBuzz. If is divisible by 3, then fizz, otherwise buzz, otherwise n. And you run that whole thing, and you can create, this right here will tell you. So for 3, it's going to be fizz. For 10, it's going to be buzz. For 15, it's going to be fizz buzz. And so I didn't quite make it to that part of the article. Then there's actually the article goes a little further into one more trick where it uses it to generate the actual array. And I think that they do that. I was just started looking at it and then I decided to go to sleep. Yeah, like they do this weird trick where they're creating a function like that and then using the parameters helper to extract the parameters of that function into this, which allows you to kind of build up arrays of things, like, right? So they're to add stuff into to create new types, and each type is builds upon an array defined in an old type. It's really weird. But I guess I haven't run through it all the way, but I believe it's going to generate something like this. And then there's going to be, I'll be able to FizzBuzz it. There you go. Type FizzBuzz like that. So, yeah, like those are crazy things you can do with TypeScript because apparently the type system is Turing complete. Not necessarily anything you want to do, but but I mean, like, I think like if you really want to get a good feel for some of it, like going through this article is a pretty good way of doing it.
Okay.
As far as actually using TypeScript, I think what this has solidified for me is, first of all, so TypeScript has interfaces, classes, and type.
Right.
I don't think I can justify using class or interface in TypeScript, pretty much ever. I think, and that's where, like, coming from a C# background gets a little more difficult because type is not the C# style of coding. It's not class oriented. But the way it works, you're basically doing stuff like saying, you might create something const 0, plus 1, foo equals that, and then it would infer from that it's that one type, or you might do something like this, right? Right. So like that's how you end up using it, and it just infers that those types match, or you can annotate it directly, right? I think, yeah, I don't think this will compile. I think I would have to, because there's no, yeah, we didn't define that. We didn't define, yeah, so if I include my thing from above, this should compile. Yeah, there it goes, it compiles. So it's saying foo is of type _1, that's what it looks like. But then like I could do, right? Or I could do like this. So I'll do 0. Something like that will also compile. So we just so you create these type annotations and stuff, and it can work through and check stuff. And the place where it gets really interesting is that you can do type unions and type intersections. So let's say foo can be 2 or 3, right? Then you could do that like this, or 4 or something like that, right? So if I do that, and then this will actually fail. I run this, right?
Okay.
Or did it not? Why did it not fail? If I do, I need to think about why would that not fail? I don't know. Yeah, that shouldn't work because the type. Like if I do this, it will definitely fail. No. Is it the parens that's making it do stuff? Oh, no, just whatever heck I was doing just made it break. Just the whole thing's broken now. Okay. Yeah, my TypeScript compiler is vomited. All right, whatever. I'll figure that out later.
Okay.
But basically, the powerful thing here, I can't show client code, obviously. Well, I can show my GemGen code. So you can see, like, there's a lot of stuff in here where I do when I'm doing type unions, where I say, like, okay, here is something that could be here. Here's a good example. A pattern I use a lot is like where you can pass in either a function. You can either pass in an item or a factory function that creates that item, right?
Okay.
So this is the type for that. It takes a generic type, and it's going to be either that type or a function that when you call it is going to create that type. And that sort of stuff gets to be pretty powerful, because now I can say, okay, my get initial state function, it's going to be that item or the factory type for it. Right? So it's got to be either something that is the state type or something that creates it. My state type itself is a generic parameter into there. So yeah, you could do like pretty interesting stuff. And I think that's where, like, in practical code, it becomes pretty handy. There's some really kind of neat things you could do in there, like where it'll analyze your flow control. Like there's this thing you can do where you can annotate that, okay, if when this function is called within a conditional scope that's created by calling this function, it can make the assumption that X is a function, and then the implementation, like, it can't verify that you implemented it correctly, but it can make that, it's kind of advice you're giving to the compiler. So then basically right here, outside of there, val is the unknown type. I don't know if you can see it down here, but inside of that conditional, nope, this is not my thing. My compiler's, it's not, my LSP is not reporting right. Within here, oh, right, sorry, this is not outside of it. Outside of it, let me find a better example. That's a weird example. All right, so right here, if we, I don't know if they'll work. Yeah, this doesn't work. This is all like in progress stuff.
Okay.
Let's see. Is this a good one? Okay. So if that is a function, then it should be able to infer. Yep. Then you can see in here that can infer that it's a create promise type function. So basically, I'm saying like if this passes, then within the scope of the conditional that defines it, you can make the assumption that this is a function type, and it actually even goes further and says, yeah, not only can I infer it's a function, I can infer that it's this even more specific type. We'll call it create promise type. So yeah, there's all sorts of stuff you can do. Oh, I guess this is the issue that it was having before with my food.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, lots of stuff. Oh, I see. This is the issue there. I can't do add here because that is not add is a type, and I can't assign it to a type. What I could do is do something like this, which will fail. Right? Should. No. Why is this going? Underscore 2 is not defined. All right. Well, something is up here. Yeah. I probably need to like rebuild all my stuff. I don't remember how to make it evaluate all of the document. That's all right. Whatever. You get the basic idea.
Right.
Yeah, that's kind of where TypeScript gets kind of a little more interesting, is when you're doing stuff like type unions and combining generics, and you could actually make something that's more useful. I think the basic stuff with classes and interfaces is not only not particularly interesting,
Okay.
also not it's potentially harmful, because in order to do it, you have to use classes, and classes have all those same disadvantages that they've always had, where like you kind of, one of the things, for example, I'm putting together a .NET course right now, and I'm talking through one of the problems. It's for people who have graduated boot camp, so I'm going back and finding like a module in their boot camp that they did, and they had one where they were modeling bees, and like, so you have a bee is born as a grub, and that's one type of bee that has all sorts of properties. Then becomes a growing bee, and then a honeymaker bee or a forager bee, and they specialize from there. So they model it as a type hierarchy when doing it. And so I kind of show them how to model that same type of hierarchy with a C#, and then point out that's a terrible way of doing it, because whether it was a grub bee and is now a honeymaker bee, that's still the same bee you're talking about, right?
Okay.
You cannot get an instance of a honeymaker bee from an instance of a grub bee. Like, if you have a grub and a honeymaker, like, they have to be different instances, right?
Okay.
So you lost the entire point in time thing, which was the entire point of this at all. Like, there's no way to assert the identity of the thing. So and then the idea is to like kind of go together and putting out, okay, well, in C# you would probably break out the concept of a life stage. So a bee is its own thing, but it has a life stage, and a kind of hammering that whole thing that an inheritance is not an is-a relationship. It's just a tool that it's just a code tool that sometimes is helpful for modeling those relationships, but sometimes is not.
Right.
Really, the is a relationship from category theory, which inheritance is kind of meant to do, even though it does it poorly. Even then, like, we only think about, like, I got really deep into like linguistics and like talking to people about how other languages work. So, like, for example, in Japanese or in Korean or Chinese, when you talk about the profession someone has, it doesn't translate really into an is a relationship. Someone is not a plumber. Someone is one of plumbers.
Would you? I mean, I remember
Yeah.
years ago trying to like make a point to myself to think of, is a and can do, right? So a person isn't a plumber. A
Yeah.
person can do, plumbing. A
Yeah.
person can do software development.
Well, yeah, and that's where like interfaces come in. But
Correct.
you're talking about the actual hard inheritance hierarchy, because we end up tying it to the is a concept. And my point is like, no, that's an artifact of the language you use, of
True.
the fact that you happen to be speaking English or German or a bunch of Romance languages which kind of do that. But if you're speaking Mandarin, you would never fall down that trap to begin with, because it's not an is a relationship in Mandarin. It's a one
So,
of, so
uh-huh.
that, which in our minds would translate to a has relationship.
Right.
So we would do like, oh, okay. So, the person is not a plumber. They have a reference to something that defines aspects of a plumber. Right.
Okay.
Yeah. Which
Okay.
is things that we kind of use interfaces for, but yeah.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So I guess I said I haven't been doing much, but I've been doing a lot of thinking of type theory lately. Nerding out on it.
I can see that. Yeah, and my thing is essentially like trying to break all this down in a way that I can actually understand, and beyond that, I can use that,
Yeah.
right? Because it's like, how do I translate all this stuff that you've shared with the advanced TypeScript? How can I break that down into something that I can actually teach that to somebody else in a
So
way that the person can see the value of knowing that from the get-go?
yeah, and I think that I think I think the value of it is kind of questionable from the get go. I think you kind of have to sales pitch it. Can y'all hear
Right.
there's wailing in the background? Uh,
So good.
yeah.
Yeah, I was
Uh,
wondering, child or 3D printer?
no, that one's child. Yeah. um, yeah, that one's a child. Um, no, the yeah, like I said, TypeScript is weird because like it's almost a marketing pitch to get someone on there and be like, oh, look at all these things you could do with your tools. And then in real life, like I found that it's not as helpful as all that unless you're very careful with it.
Right.
Same
So
time,
yeah.
in
Mhm.
like these situations where you're like in my GemGen library, where you're like, oh, well, this value can be either it can be either a thing or the factory function to create the thing. I think in
Right.
those situations it could be useful, because otherwise you're just relying on documentation to tell you like what are the possible things you can pass in there, documentation and conventions.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, something you mentioned, like how you're going through the article and learning, what things you can do and how you can do it, but trying to figure, finding a good place as to when you would use it. That's the thing that
Yeah.
strikes me. It's like, okay, I'm seeing the what, I'm seeing the how, but
Yeah.
I'm failing at seeing the why. It's like, why would I do that? What are the situations where it would make sense for me to actually do things that way?
It's definitely hard to see about a lot of this, but yeah, I think the really advanced stuff, I don't know, but it's good to
Okay.
know in order to, because that kind of feeds into the theory, and that's how I learned the theory behind stuff, is like just really trying to push it, and
Right.
it falls out. But yeah, I don't know. I think stuff like this I'm doing with Jim Gen, where you could, you know, in theory, inside of here, you could, you would know what types they are, or if you're using this function, you would be able to get some type hinting about what some of this stuff is.
Okay.
I think that's more helpful. Um, so like for libraries or stuff that other people are going to interact with,
Hmm.
where it really is like very dynamic, and it's not where there's, I think it's, I don't know. The reason I don't have a lot of problems with untyped JavaScript is because, you know, you name stuff well, and you name stuff well so that it's already unambiguous as to what it's supposed to be. I think the places where it gets difficult is where the thing can be multiple things, like the whole like, oh, this could be a thing or the thing to create the thing, or
Okay.
when you have like these concepts of basically a generic argument where this has to be a thing, but it has to be of the same type as this other thing. I think in those situations, that's really where there's relationships between like a property and properties of an object or something like that,
Mm-hmm.
to a function. In those cases, that's really hard to express with just good naming. And I absolutely think something like TypeScript could help there.
Okay.
Beyond that, it still feels a little bit like window dressing to me.
Okay.
But some people really, really like that editor support, I guess.
Well, I have to say I do like some of that. It does help a bit so that I don't have to keep my mind busy with doing the type check right in my head all
Right.
the time and like troubleshooting some things that's like, oh man, it's just the wrong type. Jeez, how come I forgot that? Well, because my mind was busy with the business part of it, not with, nitty-gritty things
How
like
often,
that.
how often do you have a bug like that's really due to a typing issue? Like it comes up like once every couple of months, maybe.
It does happen more frequently than I would like. When I'm troubleshooting
Yeah.
code that's like not necessarily I'm familiar with the code or with the people who wrote the code, so to know where
Sure.
some
That. Yeah.
issues are coming up, I'm like, I don't even know where to begin. And then I have to drop into the browsers, developer tools, into the debugger. And
Mhm.
many times what the debugger is giving me, it's not really what the problem is. And whenever I run into those situations, which is quite often where it's a typing kind of issue, I'm like, are you freaking kidding me? Right? So those like put me off into things like that. So, I mean, to me,
Mhm.
uh, I know that as much as, of course, I like strongly typed features in a language, I was really, really happy when C Sharp got the dynamic features introduced because now I could apply the 80-20 rule, right? Where 80% of the time I do want my strong types there, and I'm
Mhm.
going to rely on the compiler to tell me of
Yeah.
things that it's like, yeah, I don't want me, human, concerned about typing,
Mhm.
data typing. And on those like 20% cases where it's like, no, no, now I need to go into dynamic territory because I'm not gonna know until runtime what types I'm actually dealing with. And then having the language support that to me is like best of both worlds, right? Because now I can definitely rely on my tests, documenting or specking out what is this dynamic behavior that I'm modeling here. And then I have the test to back me up, right? And I don't know, I like having those options. Falling back to only dynamics, that kind of like bites me many times because, like you said, if developers take the time to name things accordingly, and then you can rely on just reading the name of a thing and thinking, well, if it says this thing here, it can only be this thing here. That's great. Unfortunately, depending on where the developer who wrote the code is on his like, experiencing, learning, and all of that, they may not conform with those like common sense things. And
Yeah.
that's something I've fought with, you know, for ages. I mean, pretty much as soon as I started writing and working with code,
Mhm.
you know.
Yeah. No,
And-
I agree with that, but it's like really, I don't know. When I'm in my code or whatever on my team, it's just it seems harder, more effort than it's worth. But
Okay.
yeah, I mean, I'm still building a TypeScript library for this thing that other people should interact with. I don't
Right.
know.
Yeah, and
I,
I can definitely see like it would be great if at some point you could come back and like we've seen a little bit of seeing this kind of code when you're building a library.
Yeah.
What about writing TypeScript code for like business type of code, like code that's gonna model real world, right? How would that play into what you are learning right now?
Yeah. And honestly, for that, like I just that's where I'm like, I don't run into those issues because I'm
Okay.
not really like doing stuff. And I don't even love doing it that way because, like for example, on my last project where we're doing like, we did have a lot of TypeScript types because we're using GraphQL, and GraphQL really freaking wants you to use TypeScript types in the front end, like with Apollo and stuff like that. It has a thing where it'll generate them and everything, and type check everything for you. But again, like a lot of it just ended up being more hassle than it was worth. Like, and especially because, like, okay, it was a React application, so you're taking like this object that represents an animal or whatever.
Okay.
Managing animals, and you're passing it down through all the levels of stuff like that. But in a you break out a component and you're like, you know what, I don't actually need to pass the entire animal to there. Interface segregation principle, I should only pass like the parts of the animal that I care about to there.
Yes.
Well, now you need to create a whole new type for that part of an animal. And one of the things that like again, when you get into advanced TypeScript, there are things about that makes it simpler. Like TypeScript has a partial generic type where you give it like a type and then a list of strings, and then it just like, okay, well, the type it generates is the same as the old type, but with only those keys. And that's cool, but again, like, you still have to create a new type for it, and if you don't know how to use this advanced thing or how to use generics, which most people don't, then you're defining it manually, and then you're like, this is like way more work. Right. So you either end up just going, screw it, I'm going to pass in the animal everywhere, which is breaking interface segregation principle, or you're creating a bunch of types that are just redundant and a lot of stuff.
Well, are they redundant in the sense that if they are modeling a given, like, all right, for interface segregation principle, you have, right, this one interface that has a reason to exist.
Sure, but I guess it feels verbose. So you're creating this. Okay, I want to narrow down animal with just the name and the species,
right?
And not like all the
what
others.
I actually need out of this animal. Well, this is what I need.
Sure, you create that animal, but like with raw JavaScript, you just do, you just create the object. That's one line. Now you need to create the object, but also create the type for it, which is if you want two properties, that's a declaration line. Then the line for each type, if for each property, if you're using prettier, and then the closing one, and the trailing lines. That's 5 additional lines of code for this thing that, just look at it. It's really obvious what it is. Like, and on the other side, in the component that accepts it, I'm destructuring the darn thing anyway. So it's really, really obvious what properties I expect. It's just that sort of stuff I end up running into over and over, and again, it ends up, it's pushing, what it's doing is it's pushing people in direction like, no, you really got to learn generics and kind of at least like look at all the utility types of TypeScript and understand at least the basics of its type theory in order to not have to do all that stuff. Like now you can collapse that type definition down to one line, or even just do it in line once you understand all that stuff. But again, we're at a place where it's like, no, it's not actually easy for beginners. It's that, yeah, and that's what I kept running into over and over again.
Yeah, we do have to find that balance, right? Because there's, of course, most languages do offer some things to like find some real smart implementation of certain things, like, oh, I didn't know you could do that. But at the same token, you have, well, I think you shouldn't do that, right? If most people are not going to understand what's going on, then, maybe being verbose is actually better, right? So I'm with you there, where there's a lot of like verbosity that I'm like, just cut all that stuff because it's immediately obvious to everybody. Now, if it's not immediately obvious to everybody, then yes, let's go verbose. If it's gonna look verbose to like the lead guys, the guys who are like, senior in that thing, that's great. But if they are only like 20% of the workforce in that project, then
That's
I really question.
But here's the thing, like I don't think you really I'm not okay with excusing people like not understanding the language or the standard library of the language. See, Ali, because of that. So, like, for example, with TypeScript, you have all these utility types, which, by the way, if you're looking, the documentation is weirdly organized. Like, this should be front and center of every single page. Kind of be like, these are the utility types. It's kind of like toward the back of their documentation.
Okay.
Like, this is like the partial thing that was great. So you have you have a a to do, and partial. Sorry, partial is one where it's like, oh, it can have any of those properties, but all of them are all the property. It makes all the properties optional of an object. I mean, pick is the one I was talking about, where like you have your to do, and you're gonna take the title and its completed status only, and that generates a new type.
Right.
Like, yeah, you could be like, well, I never saw this before. I only read the first 2 pages of the TypeScript documentation. And the rest of it I found complex because I don't understand generics. But at that point, I'm like, you probably shouldn't be using TypeScript if you don't understand generics. Like, I know. That's why it's maybe not for beginners. Because this isn't actually complex. It just requires you sitting down and actually studying this concept.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not okay with like excusing people on that, because this isn't like something weird that you're doing with the language. This is what you're supposed to do with it. It's just it involves a concept that most people don't like learning.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think we'll be talking more about this as time goes on.
Yeah.
But this is all good stuff, man. Thanks for sharing that. It's also, gives me some perspective on some TypeScript stuff that I hadn't seen before.
Yeah.
And, as I look more into it, I'm at that point where it's like, I don't even know what I don't know, to be very honest. That's why I started looking into it.
Well, so this is a good place to start. Look at the utility types and try to figure and be like, how, and understand they're all implemented in TypeScript.
Okay.
And like you could be like, well, how the heck do they even implement that? And that's a good starting point.
Okay. Yeah, I'll definitely do that. And again, remember that I'm going to be coming from the standpoint of, why do I need this?
Yeah.
Why, choose that? Like, why would I make the choice to say, this is what I need to do, and this is the why?
Yeah. Oh, no, but this is what gets you to that hump of knowing what you didn't know.
Gotcha.
That's what gets you that. All right, I do have to run, but
Oh yeah, me too.
it's good stuff. I'm gonna post a couple links in the chat.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Add that to the page and to the video description and all.
Yeah, next time you talk more.
No, that was good, man. That was good conversation. I hope it was helpful to those who joined us. And again, this is going to be on the internet, so whenever people ask me about TypeScript, advanced TypeScript, I'm going to have a link that I can point people to.
Sure. All right.
Very cool. All right.
All right.
Thanks, George. Talk to you later, man.